Hey kiddies, it's Triple Feature Tuesday, and this week we're looking at rappers versus vampires. I mean, it's just a nice change of pace. Like, usually vampire movies are about white vampires hunting down white women, and then white heroes have to save the day and everything. Unless it's a Blade movie, in which case you're winning already, as long as you're not watching the third one, because the first two Blade movies are just perfect and amazing in completely different ways. But every so often you get rappers fighting vampires to save the world. So we're going to look at 3 movies in which prominent rappers from various different points in the history of hip-hop go after vampires and, you know, have varying degrees of success. Now that I think about it, they all die. That's kind of a bummer. Our menu is going to include Dracula 3000, The Bleeding, and I Am Legend. Now, don't let the fact that the movie looks like it was shot on your dad's camcorder from the 1990s, or that it stars Casper Van Dien, let you think that this was just a throwaway television production that nobody really gave a shit about and probably was used for a tax shelter. This was a made-for-the Sci-Fi Channel movie. It's terrible. It is, like, worse than terrible. It's forgettable. Like, I was watching it. So often, I don't have to actually rewatch the movies for these because, you know, I've watched them a zillion times or just, you know, they're memorable. This one, I did have to, like, watch the first 2 movies, including this one. And I gotta tell you, I was forgetting it as I was watching it. It was weird. It was like I was Leonard Shelby in Memento, where it's just like, none of this is sticking, but I'm not even playing Candy Crush while I'm watching it. It's really, really kind of goofy in terms of the use of nothing of the plot or character from Bram Stoker's Dracula, but just names. So Casper Van Dien and his oddly high voice plays Captain Van Helsing, and part of his crew are intern Mina Murray and the science whiz Professor Arthur Holmwood. And they're in, like, the Transylvania sector, or no, they are a salvage group trying to get a ship that had recently come out of the Transylvania section of space. It's really, really dumb. But it has a moderately decent cast. Like, Casper Van Dien is always a good time. His right-hand woman is Erica Eleniak, which, you know, was just a bummer. But it also features an obligatory cameo by Udo Kier. Really good performances by Tiny Zeus Lister, who, you know, he's just always good in whatever movie he's in. Like, outside of The Fifth Element or Dark Knight, he doesn't really get a lot of deep parts, but he always does well with them when he does. And Coolio. Coolio of Fantastic Voyage and Gangsta's Paradise fame plays 187, which it's adorable because you have all these other characters that have, you know, Dracula, the novel-inspired names, and even Erica Eleniak, who doesn't have a specific name. Her name is Aurora. But the 2 black guys, Tiny Zeus Lister and Coolio, their names are Humvee and 187. Lister is Humvee because he can, you know, like bench press a Humvee or something like that. And Coolio is named 187, not for the murder angle, but because supposedly that used to be his IQ before he started smoking weed all the time. 'Cause he's black. So, they get onto this ship that is, of course, infested with vampires, and the vampires are all kind of dried up from, you know, being in space forever and a day. Coolio is the one that actually wakes them up by busting into the coffins looking for, as you guessed it, dope. Because, again, he's black. But he actually is the first person turned into a vampire. And I'd seen Coolio in, like, 1 or 2 other things, like, namely, the director's cut of Daredevil has a whole side plot that was cut out where Matt and Foggy are representing Coolio as an innocent man accused of murder. In the Daredevil movie, he was just kind of a standard, just playing a guy framed for murder and probably going to get killed in jail. But in this one, I think they basically just said, you know what, you're going to turn into a vampire and then just go to town. And he does. Coolio's really entertaining throughout this whole movie. He's like the only thing that's really a lot of fun, because he's just going completely zany, and if only to juxtapose it from, like, the super duper tough guy that he's always presenting in his music videos and such. It's really just a lot of fun to see him having fun and, you know, running around with the Coolio hair and fangs and just being silly throughout the whole thing. It was the only thing I liked about the movie. Well, that and the movie ends up with the only two people left are Tiny Lister and Erica Eleniak, and the whole ship is about to fly into a sun, and they're like, "You want to just go bang? Yeah, let's just go bang." And then, you know, the movie ends. So that was kind of fun. The movie doesn't end. It so much just kind of stops, but it's bad. It's really bad. Like, this is going to be one of those triple features that actually lives up to the name of terrible triple feature. It is so boring. It is so forgetful. I love spaceships in low budget movies because it's always, you know, well, let's just film it in a factory, and the idea is sound as long as you keep all the stuff you're shooting to like catwalks and metal grates. But when you start showing parts of the factory or the warehouse that have concrete, it stops making sense because I just don't see concrete being the most aerodynamic or light material to build a spaceship from. But I understand you're on a budget, but you know, try to keep that in mind. In the middle of this future sci-fi take on Dracula on a spaceship in space, there is a full-on cape and clasp Bela Lugosi-esque vampire, Count Orlok, throughout the whole thing. It is especially jarring and makes the movie look even sillier. It was as if all the costuming was left up to every actor, and whereas everybody else basically just wore their own clothes, the guy playing the vampire was like, no, we need to go old school with this. It's going to make a statement about how the future is dominated by the past, and also I've had this costume since I was 12. Also, like, if your guy is Casper Van Dien, have you really looked for anybody else to play a macho guy? Because it's weird, because Casper Van Dien does look macho, you know, in a pretty boy model sort of way, but the voice, it's always just so jarring. But he was in Starship Troopers and Sleepy Hollow, so we love him forever. Next up, we have The Bleeding, starring mouth breather / local Vin Diesel franchisee Michael Mathias, recently discharged Afghanistan war veteran who has come home to find that his parents have been murdered and his brother has been murdered, and he has been, you know, pulled into this weird vampire underworld because, as it turns out, his brother is now about to become the king of the vampires, and he killed the parents, and now the brother has to, you know, save the world and avenge everybody. And it's, you know, for a plot that simple, it's really confusing a lot of the times because it's just hard to keep track of, you know, A, what they're saying. They do a really wonderful job of not balancing the audio, so like the voice, the dialogue will be muttering, and then all the action will be as loud as humanly possible. On top of the fact that it just doesn't make any sense throughout the whole thing. But this guy, Michael Mathias, playing Sean Black, is on a mission to save the world from vampires, namely his brother, the vampire. His brother, played by Vinnie Jones. Vinnie Jones, the English actor from the Guy Ritchie films and other things. We love Vinnie Jones a lot. We wouldn't cast him as an American, though, because Vinnie just has a pretty solid British accent because he's British, and I venture to guess that they didn't want to spend a lot of money on a dialect coach, so they just told Vinny to do the Southern thing. You know, pretend like if you're English, the easiest way to get an American accent is to do the Southern accent. Otherwise, you're doing a lot of ers and stuff like this. So Vinny went Southern. A lot of the times he comes off as Cajun with, you know, the weird long hair and like the Creole accent, which jives completely well with Michael Mathias, who again is doing his level best to be Vin Diesel, so he's got the phony baloney New York accent, and so it's really great when they have scenes together and you're like, you guys weren't even raised on the same planet, let alone the same house. But on Sean Black's journey to avenge his parents and save the world from vampires, he meets up with our Basil exposition of the film, played by DMX. Now this is well after DMX was actually trying to have a real film career. Like, if you recall, he was in a few movies that were released in theaters, and it was like the building of a career. He was in Romeo Must Die with Jet Li, Exit Wounds with Steven Seagal, which may have been one of the last, if not the last, Steven Seagal film released in theaters, and also Cradle to the Grave was kind of a big deal. And he used to be like looked like, back then he looked like, you know, a real, you know, the next sort of action star, on top of like the personality, the voice. We love DMX. He looks like he's dying in this movie. It came out in 2009. Can anybody help me out here? I tried looking up a little bit of info about if he was having any health problems around then, because he looks very skinny and very sick. Delightfully, though, he still has the exact same voice, and since, you know, it's a low budget movie and they probably didn't have sound on the set, everything is ADR'd, so everybody will be re-recording their voices normally, but when it's DMX, it just sounds like we just pushed play on one of his singles or albums, and it's just like the full-on DMX screaming voice. He plays Tag, who is the guy that has been fighting the main fight against vampires, but of course now that our big super duper white guy has shown up, he's going to get killed fairly quickly, but he does have a pretty good fight with Vinnie Jones, which is the highlight of the movie for me. Oddly enough, it was not the half-assed Blade-inspired rave/orgy thing at the end of the movie. Blade is fantastic, like, period, start to finish, no qualifications. But it's weird that the vampire dance party thing keeps popping up in vampire movies now, especially when, like, they're not going to do it well. I think they used the same warehouse or abandoned factory from Dracula 3000, but at least it's set on the planet Earth. It's got all these people dancing around, strobe lights, and they've got glow sticks, but they're all just the regular survival camping glow sticks. They don't even have fun little colors to them, so it's just all just like, this is like some dad came up with a rave party and this is what it looks like. It's weird how much it sort of wants to be Fast and the Furious versus vampires, because again, cannot stress enough, Michael Mathias just is trying to be Vin Diesel. There is a relentlessly boring narration throughout this entire film by Michael Mathias. It got so bad, like I was zoning out while I was watching the movie, and it was like that part in Tropic Thunder where Jay Baruchel is explaining Blu-ray versus HD to Kirk Lazarus, and all of a sudden Robert Downey Jr. just yells, "Have you been talking to me this entire time? Holy shit!" Because it's like, I'm listening to him, it's like, God, are you doing this for my benefit? Because please stop. The movie is very obsessed with cars throughout the whole thing, and honestly, the cars are the best looking things in the whole movie, so, you know, maybe that was a smart thing. But really bummed to see how little DMX was in it. I kind of expected it. Like, after I did the month of 50 Cent movies, I started getting a feel for these direct-to-video movies where people show up to get a paycheck, film like 1 or 2 scenes, and then go home, because, you know, that sounds like a fun way to spend the weekend. Definitely why Armand Assante is in this movie for 5 whole minutes that have nothing to do with anything else. It's really, like, he doesn't even come back at the end. Like, at least Michael Madsen is something of a character in the film, even though he's just playing, you know, 5 different cliches at the same time. That's kind of a stretch. Usually he's just doing 1 or 2, so that's something. But not enough DMX in this movie, because just, oh God, I could listen to him reading the phone book with that voice. It's just always cool and mean and angry. Like, is there something like, does DMX put out like a lullaby album, or DMX reads children's classics? Because that would just be delightful. Finally, we have I Am Legend, and I'm fudging this only slightly, because if you look up the Wikipedia article, the monsters are still referred to as vampires. I Am Legend is the 3rd film adaptation of Richard Matheson's I Am Legend, the first one being the Vincent Price film The Last Man on Earth, which is the closest to the actual book. The second was Charlton Heston's The Omega Man, and now we have I Am Legend, starring the Fresh Prince, Will Smith. The story is supposed to be about the last man on Earth in a world populated by vampires. And, you know, it's important in the story that they are vampires because the whole gag is they end up rebuilding society. And you need somewhat of a sentient monster. And so you had that definitely with The Last Man on Earth, and to a lesser extent with the Omega Man, because they were mutants, but they were still cognizant of things. In this one, they're just sort of running around as, you know, non-committal zombies. It's sort of like the 28 Days Later thing, where it's just like, we want to make this a zombie movie, but we don't want to call them zombies, but they're zombies. But for my purposes, I'm just going to call them vampires, which they're referred to extensively as vampires in the Wikipedia summary. I saw this in the theaters in the IMAX, because if you recall, if you went and saw this with IMAX, you got to see the first 10 minutes or so of The Dark Knight before The Dark Knight came out. It was just the whole bank robbery scene in the beginning. We went to see it specifically for that, and it was so bad because after that was finished, we all just kind of looked at each other and like, I guess we'll stay for the movie? And the movie's not bad. It was the right choice to stay for the movie because basically the movie is Will Smith doing a Tom Hanks Castaway thing where it's just him on screen doing things with very little dialogue, or monologuing rather. I mean, he has a dog to talk to, but let's be real. And Will Smith is more than ate up to the task. Will Smith is always interesting to watch on screen, even if he doesn't always pick the most interesting films to be in. He plays a military doctor who is desperately trying to find a cure, based on his own convenient natural immunity to the evil disease that turns everybody into vampires. You watch him kind of slowly going insane from loneliness throughout the whole thing, and again, it's pretty impressive. Will Smith, of the three rappers in this triple feature, had the most extensive acting career at this point. Not just with the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, but I mean, after that, why am I explaining this? Like, this is not an obscure thing. You know who Will Smith is. You know all the things he's in. He's really good. Doesn't always pick good movies, but he's always really good in them. And this is one of those examples where this movie is not good. It's really boring. If they had followed the book a bit more, he'd have a lot more interesting stuff. The ending is completely phoned in and bad, and, well, I'm also not a fan of Sonia Braga, so every time she shows up, it's kind of a bummer. And then it ends. Oddly enough, the original ending for the film was a bit closer to the original story, and so, of course, we had to get rid of that because, there's no way we can have any sort of complexity to our bad guys. It is either good guys or bad guys. The one main thing to take from I Am Legend is that Will Smith was saving those eggs. I mean, you came into his house, you took those eggs, he was saving them for a special occasion because the world has ended, and you ate his eggs, and that was a bummer. Vampires and rappers, you'd think there would be more. I mean, at this point, with all the other stuff he's done, you'd think Ice-T would have done a vampire movie at this point. I mean, he's in at least one of the Leprechaun movies. He's been a cyberpunk guerrilla warfare guy, and he's even played a kangaroo, but no vampires? What the F? God, it was rough. It was just, don't watch any of these movies. I mean, maybe I Am Legend if it's on TV, but you can do better. Watch The Omega Man or The Last Man on Earth, because, well, The Last Man on Earth is public domain, so you pick any random horror movie compilation DVD set and it will be there. Vampires, rappers, oddly a good combination that did not turn out to be a good time for any of these movies. And I'll see you next time.